Hello, and welcome once again to Escaping Dystopia. My name is Wah. I'll be your host for tonight. Tonight is episode 132, Fascism to the Face. Today is January 15th, 2026. It's been a good little while since our last show, which we did in September. Wanted to talk about that just a little bit. It's been, one of the things that I don't know that the internet needs a whole lot more is a 50-plus-year-old white guy talking to a camera from his basement. But in this case, whatever. Gotta do what you gotta do. So, what's going on with the show? Obviously, the title for the show, Fascism to the Face. This last week, a woman was killed by ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement. She was in the street, cops yelling, tried to drive away. They shot her in the face and killed her right there. This has been building for a while. The immigration enforcement actions have been increasingly instigatory. From the Donald administration, today, actually, as of the 15th, the end game for that became clear that the idea is going to be to invoke the Insurrection Act and then basically take over every state government so you can control the elections. There have been a number of lawsuits going against the various election things. So I'm going to talk about this. Folks, this is episode 132. The name of the show is Escaping Dystopia. I started this scene, after an adult life of following international politics and following the U.S. and writing about this stuff over and over, and then I decided to start doing the show as Donald showed up, and I was like, why? This is so stupid. Every step of the way, it's just kind of gotten a little bit dumber. To the point of even when things were really good and we had nice, competent government doing good things during the Biden years, a lot of people were still super stupid and gave him no credit for it, which set up, of course, the return of a felon. When somebody tries to overthrow your government and then you later give them power again with the knowledge of what they plan to do, it gets really bad. And 2025 really demonstrated that pretty hardcore for the United States. It was a hard year for anybody who cares about good things. So speaking of which, and I'll talk about this as we get into the show, as many of you know, if this is not your first time you've watched me, then you may have heard the term of Spaceship Earth and this moral theory that I'm talking about. As I've noted before, I'm not into supernatural stuff per se, except for fantasy. Having fun. I've been arc raidering a bunch. That's actually almost probably like a big part of the reason why there hasn't been a show since September. I found a really fun game to play, and it's been nice to dive into another universe. I actually wrote a nice piece about the morality of Esperanza. I keep wanting to call it Esperanza because Esperanza is a Spanish word for hope, right? And so the hope of a new kind of moral clarity is a big part of my show, big part of what I'm talking about. I would say life's work to a certain degree. But the idea of Spaceship Earth is that we don't need supernatural crazy stuff to understand what is good and bad, that in fact we can figure it out and are doing so here on our Spaceship Earth. In addition, I'd say this is never really any different than it's ever been. It's always just been us deciding what is good and bad, but we don't need that supernatural veneer any longer. That's one of the things that's been really fun, and I wrote about this again in the piece about arc raiders and the sense of what kind of moral code shows up in this kind of post-apocalyptic environment. My goal here with the show is to escape the dystopian thing that we're dealing with Donald, and a lot of times in my shows I'll talk about various news things and kind of cover it in various ways, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what Donald's been doing, a number of things over the last little while, and kind of in the way that I talk to some of my friends about this. I know some people, and this is what's been really difficult about this last year and even the last few years, is the number of people who have disconnected from news media, from following it. And as someone, my degree was in this stuff, and I've been doing news analysis and write that for my entire adult life, as someone on the fringes of this who has a different profession. But it's been so sad to see what's happened, especially over the last few years, and now what's happened with CBS and the corporate news media. One of the perspective things I have from actually studying the history of media and corporate news media is this golden age of like what people kind of assume that ever existed didn't really ever exist much, right? We had a very small pool of people for a while as mass media came big and on TV, and they had a certain code for how they discuss things, but that didn't last very long, and technology quickly wiped it away. The ability now that we have, as I'm demonstrating, right, to do these kind of individualized global broadcasts has kind of oddly democratized media, but at the same time it illustrates this kind of L-shaped pattern that happens where there's a great many people of, white guys talking into their camera, but without, the corporate entity around it, without some sort of promotional push, without a whole more kind of production value and promotional marketing, all those kind of things. The voices get lost in the shuffle, which, it is what it is. It's been interesting to watch and see, though. I'm having my show here. It's been fun. It's one of those things when it's, as someone who is watching this outside of the corporate media kind of halo, so many things are so much easier to see, right, without that kind of constant, beltway kind of shuffle. So Donald, where are we at here? So there was supposed to be, so just to bring you back to September up till now, so there was a government shutdown for about a month and a half last year, and one of the things that happened during that is there was a new House rep who was supposed to be seated, and they wouldn't seat her for like 40 days, and then they finally seated her, and one of the things that she voted on immediately was this discharge petition. We have a law here in the United States that has now been voted on by Congress, signed by the president, that requires the release of the Epstein files. They released less than 1% of them and now have just stopped. This is one of those things, and I talk about this a lot, about the moral clarity, and if everyone in the country agreed and knew that Donald raped these girls as he did, we know this, but if everyone knew it and it was out, we wouldn't be having these conversations over and over again. Like, he, of course, has lied constantly about this, as he does about nearly everything at this point, but this is what is so disconcerting about the whole situation, right? Because I know that everyone out there thinks that that's horrible, right? Everybody knows that that's a horrible thing to do, that the only kind of people who do that are horrible people. Donald is one of those people. He's a horrible person. He's one of the worst people ever. But because he has the power, the levers of power, and because all of these other people, who are also many of them quite horrible, have realized that they can gain power and influence and money by kowtowing to his horribleness. That's why we're here. I talked about this before, and I'll bring this up, and I'm going to talk about this a lot. But there's a term that I use to kind of to define this, and I say, talking about Donald and other people like this, the lies are the fascism, right? And for those of you curious about this, I've done a whole show about the fascism stuff. So if you want to be like, you don't know what that word means, yeah, I've got 30 minutes plus talking about formal definitions and how these people fit, how it's a little bit different now. But there's no question here that this is now a fascist government, the fascism to the face, the lies, and this is one of the things, right? Because the U.S. government and all governments, they're built, it's all made of people, right, ultimately, and people have to make decisions. And there are, in the United States, we've been through a number of wars, we've been through a lot of things, there are laws on the book that say, oh, if this particular situation happens, there's this way to deal with it, right? This is where the emergency tariffs came in. So Donald just declared, and it's like you read through and then it finally, oh, you need this person to say it? Okay, I know that person. And now on his second term, right, we have this completely corrupt Department of Justice. And so complete lackeys in there, they're going after his opponents, like he's requested multiple times. Like for this ICE shooting in Minnesota, the FBI, they had 6 people resign because of what I'm about to tell you, which is that they are investigating the partner of the woman who was killed for domestic terror ties. to the anti-fascist movement. This is what they call Antifa, right? The anti-fascists. It's been so much to the degree that they have now called this anti-fascist movement domestic terrorists. So when you're calling anti-fascist terrorists, that tells you who they are. So this word, this saying that the lies are the fascism, that the fascism is here, this is it's so clear that when their top priority, their top enemies, and this is testified about in the halls of Congress, that the anti-fascists are their biggest enemy. That's words have meaning. So Donald said, and he was talking about the law, and he said, the only limits here on my power are my own morality. He said that. He says a lot of things, and this is one of the things that's difficult about this, because he has what is advancing dementia. That's why he keeps having all of these MRIs on his brain. He's had a lot of kind of stroke activity, and the thing on his hand, right, the big bruise is from an IV, because the rest of his veins are all shot, because again, he's in bad shape. So there's all this power, there's this power vacuum, and then that's why all of this horrible stuff is happening, and he keeps acting like it's not. Because for him, like the Epstein law, right? They're trying to, now the Department of Justice is trying to hold the Clintons in contempt, because they're not going to come in and do this silly pony show without the files being released, which the Clintons have called on, be like, release everything. What are you talking about? And again, less than 1% of the stuff that they have on Epstein has been released. There are videos of, again, everything is supposed to be out there. And it is wildly, hugely embarrassing for a lot of people who are not talking about this, because again, they own large media companies. This is, again, you don't get to fascism without corporate compliance. And that's the thing that's really happened this last year. When you have the gay president of Apple giving Donald this golden nugget to put on his desk, and there's this competition for kissing his ass, and these corporate donors for the White House, which was partially destroyed. Again, they've destroyed the White House, just tore it down without plans. There's no approval. There's supposed to be, but again, when you just do stuff, each step along the way, they realize that, if we take out the inspector generals, that was one of the first things he does, and then the Supreme Court says, yeah, that's okay. But that then sets up everything else, and now with the Department of Justice, where he's got clear, unquestionable, his supporters, right, sycophants, the cabinet meetings are just, it's so pathetic, and that these are adults. That's been one of the saddest things for me, too, is the number of adults that are just willing to be these faceless thugs, to put on masks and do this stuff. And, because I never thought, like in movies where there's always those, just hordes of endless enemies to get their ass kicked by the hero, right? Who would, that's unrealistic. There wouldn't be hordes of mid dudes just showing up to be thugs. I was like, that was never, and now it's very, I understand completely. That's actually how it works. Why it works. There's some good reading on this too, if you want to read a little bit more about that. But yeah, that's a lot of it too. The move to equality that we've been having as a society for people who had privilege felt like oppression, and that's why they're joining fascism, and in great numbers. Again, the Venezuelan oil. So the president ordered the military to support the Department of Justice, again, completely corrupt, in capturing Nicolas Maduro, who was the president of Venezuela. So we have him now in custody. This hasn't really changed the dynamics of politics in Venezuela. The vice president's now in charge. They have started, though, looting the Venezuelan oil, and I shit you not, to an offshore account in Qatar. Again, the Department of Justice is like, yeah, that's fine. We're doing this. So again, but the idea in Donald's is we're selling this oil. It's going to benefit the American people and the Venezuelan people, and the lies are the fascism, folks. The lies, and one of the things too about all of our system of government and all that was built on the notion that it is filled with people with integrity. You have to have people do things. It's about people. Yeah, asterisk for the next few years as we singularity out of this whole people thing. So it's all made of people, but the idea was that they're people of integrity and people who wouldn't just lie. But Donald is a constant, total liar. He just lies constantly. And so everything that's built around the assumption that integrity exists is breaking, because that's no longer a true assumption. That's been one of the things that's so difficult. Oh, and about the Venezuela stuff, we'll get to the next ridiculous thing here in a moment. But Venezuelan oil is difficult. It's more expensive to produce, right? So there's a break-even point for oil. Oil prices right now are quite low. And so the actual Venezuelan oil, and they're like, oh, they're not making enough oil because it's not very profitable right now, right? When those margins are thin on really hard, difficult work. And again, this is like offshore shale and just like oil. I don't know exactly how their oil is, and I'm looked into a little bit, read some stuff about it. They do have the kind of oil that works really well with U.S. refineries. We're built for like some of the heavier oil, and there's a whole oil industry stuff. But the fact of the matter is the industry in Venezuela is not investable, as the oil executive said, because the oil isn't worth that much more than it costs to get it out of the ground. And when you have to, now that's after you have everything built and running, right? So when you have to go out there, build the infrastructure, do all this stuff, and then you're looking at $2 or $3 or $10 of profit per barrel, when, for something else it's $70 or $80 of profit per barrel, right? When oil prices go up, and they're not even that high right now. I didn't look it up. I think they're in like the $40 to $60 range. But there's just not that much profit to be made, so there's not that much investment. It doesn't make sense. And this has been something that's been plaguing Venezuela for a while, and one of the reasons why their economy has been so bad is because they can't make money. That's the danger of being the petro state. They've got huge reserves, but they're difficult to get to and expensive. So that is just going to but then they can take the oil that they've sold it, and they're just, when you're running a mob kind of boss, a protection racket, like the actual product doesn't matter much. Everything's profit, right? People are just paying you not to kill them. It's all profit. So that brings us to the Greenland thing. I can't really explain this other than somebody somewhere, like the actual explanation, right? For the whole, like, oh, asylum, I just don't know what that word, they're sending us crazy people. Like, that is understandable. He's an idiot. But the Greenland thing, I think it has to do with some rare earth stuff that he thinks is up there or something in that way. Because, again, the U.S. has a treaty with Greenland. We can do whatever we want to militarily, build bases. It doesn't even make sense other than maybe he looked at a map and one of the Mercator projections where Greenland is huge. I don't know. But they had a meeting with Greenland, and flat out the Greenland people almost like stormed out of it. Like, this is so stupid. I don't even know what we're doing here. Which brings us to Russia, right? And then that Donald is clearly a Russian tool. They, as well as Israel, are probably blackmailing him with the Epstein stuff. Now you'd be like, oh, well, we can just get the Epstein stuff out and that'll be fine. Yeah, the Epstein stuff includes like video of rubbing tugs with him with 14 and 15-year-old girls. I mean, it's horrible things. He's not going to survive it coming out. That's why they've had to just blatantly violate the law. I mean, the law is so clear. And this is one of the things that's really disturbing about this, is that a lot of these people are acting like the law they're never going to have to face the law of the United States. Like, that they are going to get away with it. And that's been the way they've been acting. It's so blatant and so just blatant. I mean, and just blunt. And so the law says you have to do this. They're not. That's a violation. So with Russia, he said he'd solve the war with Ukraine in a day. Obviously, complete horseshit. It continues to grind on, pretty horrible. Now Europe is picking up most of the time because we're not even helping anymore. We're not even giving information anymore to Ukraine about movements or anything like that. So that has been really, again, extremely disheartening to see. Had Harris won, you would see Putin now probably giving up. Ukraine's had to hit him back a lot harder, a lot deeper. The pain to the Russian economy is pretty rough, but it still grinds on. Israel, of course. The genocide continues with all our support now, right? So all of these things were horrible, and you see like these same horrible people. Netanyahu's probably one of Donald's closest friends at this point. The tariffs, apparently we're getting a ruling this week where the Supreme Court's going to find a way to let Donald do something blatantly ridiculous based on his complete lack of integrity and lies. The Supreme Court, Republican-dominated now. 3 of the justices were appointed by this child-raping felon. So their integrity and their, their authority this is part of why the U.S. is collapsing because our moral authority is gone, right? And with that, you might think, well, that doesn't matter. But it matters as much as democracy. We've always made up these rules for ourselves, right? These good and bad sense. And when you're not good, it's not good. So with the tariffs, hopefully they'll knock those back. Donald is claiming that will destroy the country. It makes no sense because he's lying. Jobs, this last year, 2025, was the worst job creation year outside of a recession since the early 2000s, since the early aughts. Anybody who's looking for work is realizing that through both technology and the rest of this stuff and just the uncertainty that the job market's just been completely crushed. This came from a roaring, cruising economy that we'd had under Biden for the last few years. So 2025 was really the transition year. They stopped publishing the BLS reports. They fired the head of the BLS, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, after they had put out a report that the administration didn't like. They buried a few of them. Then with the government shutdown, they didn't come out. They just came out claiming that there were 50,000 jobs created last December, but at the same time, they revised down October and November by 75,000. So even with what they're saying, they revised it down once again by more jobs than were created. So net jobs were lost. This is something that's been happening for basically the last 6 months of last year. 2026, it's going to be really undeniable. They cut off the healthcare premium, so about 1 million people so far have lost health insurance. It's going to be staggered for this, so this is going to happen over this next year. There's a lot of people who had and needed healthcare access lose it. That continues to really hurt the economy. So, like I said, I was going to cover the CBS, now run by Barry Weiss, has within the last couple of weeks just become a complete joke, clown show, totally. So that's how the fascism and the corporate power melds with the government power. And you seeing it happen is difficult when you know that that's what's happening. And you're like, if I could yell at these people on that show, this would be clear. And that person's lying. Why is there no repercussions for that? And that's one of the things, and this is one of the things that Josh Marshall runs a website called Talking Points Memo. He had a really good point about this. And a lot of the point of journalism from the get-go, remember we were talking about that earlier, about the whole history of journalism. But the cycle generally is you report on something that's wrong, it gets more attention, the government gets involved, maybe there's an investigation or something, right? So these are the things, government corruption sparked by reporting, and that leads to an investigation, and that leads to less corruption. But when you have blatant and clear and open corruption, what's the reporting? Yes, Donald just stole hundreds of $millions. He sent it to his private account in Qatar. All right, now here's sports. Right? Is the DOJ going to... No, the DOJ set up the account. The DOJ is overseeing the money. So, everybody, a lot of people have these assumptions that there's somebody else in to step in. There's another authority. There's not. It's integrity, and that's what it was. It's human integrity that was the backstop. And everyone's, well, he's funny. I mean, yeah, he's a liar, but he's funny, and he has no integrity, and that destroys the system. And he's also a fascist and racist piece of shit. That's all part of that too. The rank bigotry and all that. 250 years, 1776 to 2026. That was it. I'll end on this. I've covered most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about tonight, which obviously, and there's more. I mean, there's a bunch more that has happened that is leading the United States to a place where even were we to recover quickly, it causes lasting and permanent damage. The attacks on science, these are the things that end empires, right? The attacks on our own people, the immigration stuff, and it's not slowing down. Homeland Security is constantly throwing out white supremacist stuff. And to be clear, it's white supremacist. That's the difference, and I've talked about this in a few places, and this is really uncomfortable. But as I noted, like, one of their strongest allies currently is Israel. So the white supremacy of the 21st century, like, Jewish people are white now. So it's a little bit different than what happened in the 20th century. And as with that, as who's being targeted, now you'll notice that people who don't share an ethnicity with the folks being targeted and are safe on the white side have a different kind of response to the cops just stopping people on the street because they look Hispanic, right? I don't think Tony Dokopil would be so, or however the hell you say that name out, that CBS guy is such a clown. But he converted to Judaism, and I have a feeling that if it was Jewish people being stopped and grabbed on the street for looking Jewish or having Jewish names and having to prove their citizenship and being thrown into detention and deported to prisons in other countries because they were Jewish, I think that our media would be acting a little bit different than the way that it is because they're targeting Hispanics. And that's white supremacy, and that's the white supremacy of the 21st century, which sucks. It sucks. I just want to play my game. Like, I just want to have fun. Like, there's a bunch of fun, like, games. I just want to make my game. I don't want to have to do this. I mean, I enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. Gets it out of my head. But I want to make it clear, if you made it all the way to the end, I always give a little... It's important. I don't think Donald's going to leave office. I don't think he's going to stop. I think he's going to have to be stopped. I think all of it will take a movement of... They've been various colors in the past, but it will take a red, white, and blue movement to restore the United States to something. I have to have patience with this, right? Because it's the way that our media doesn't communicate, the way that people process information, right? To go from a year ago, year and a half, U.S. is a great place. Economy is the envy of the world. Freedom on the march. To what's you're seeing now in Minnesota and what's happened in California, and it'll be across the nation. And even, our media is so distracted by this fool and all the stuff he says, we're not even getting deep reporting on all the number of people who've died and just killed in detention. And the numbers keep going up. And this idea, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but the one death is a tragedy and a million is a statistic. And we're heading towards statistic territory pretty quickly. If you're watching this, be ready, because it's going to take you and me and pretty much a good portion of us to get out of this. So, peace out. Can't escape dystopia till you admit that you're in it, I guess, right? Have a good one. See you next time.